In the dusty mountains of Afghanistan, where the morning mist clung to ancient rocks like secrets waiting to be told, a young woman adjusted her scope for the eighth and final time. Her hands were steady, her breathing controlled, and her mind crystal clear. What happened in the next 12 minutes would not only save the lives of her entire unit, but would also shatter every assumption the military had about what a woman could accomplish in combat. Sarah Chen had been told she wasn't strong enough, wasn't fast enough, and definitely wasn't tough enough to be a Delta Force sniper. The doubters were about to learn just how wrong they were. This is the true story of how one underestimated soldier changed everything in less time than it takes to eat lunch, and why her actions that day are still talked about in military circles around the world. Some heroes wear capes, others wear camouflage and carry a rifle that weighs more than most people's luggage. This is Sarah's story, a story of precision, courage, and proving that strength comes in many forms. Sarah Chen never planned to become a soldier, let alone one of the most feared snipers in the Delta Force. Growing up in a small town in Oregon, she was the girl who helped her grandmother tend to the vegetable garden and spent her afternoons reading books under the old oak tree behind their house. Her parents ran a small hardware store, and most people in town knew her as the quiet, polite girl who always said please and thank you. But Sarah had a secret that nobody knew about, not even her closest friends. Every weekend, while other teenagers were hanging out at the mall or going to movies, Sarah would disappear into the woods with her grandfather's old hunting rifle. Her grandfather, a Korean War veteran named Frank, had taught her to shoot when she was just 10 years old. He said she had a natural gift, something he had never seen before in all his years of hunting. Frank would set up targets at impossible distances, places where even experienced hunters would struggle to hit anything. Sarah would lie on the forest floor, adjust her breathing, and squeeze the trigger with the gentleness of someone picking a flower. The bullet would fly through the air and hit exactly where she intended every single time. Frank would shake his head in amazement and tell her she had the steadiest hands he had ever seen. As Sarah grew older, her skills only improved. She could hit a soda can from 800 yards away, something that should have been impossible for someone using basic hunting equipment. But Sarah wasn't just naturally gifted, she was obsessed with perfection. She would practice for hours, studying wind patterns, learning how temperature affected bullet trajectory, and understanding how her own heartbeat could throw off a shot by inches. When Sarah graduated from high school, she shocked everyone by announcing she was joining the army. Her parents were devastated. They had expected her to go to college, maybe become a teacher or a nurse like most of the other girls from their small town. They couldn't understand why their gentle, book-loving daughter wanted to become a soldier. The truth was that Sarah felt called to serve. She had watched the news coverage of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and something deep inside her knew she had skills that could save lives. She also knew that people would underestimate her because she was small, quiet, and female. Standing at just 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighing barely 120 pounds, Sarah looked more like someone who should be working in a library than carrying a rifle in combat. Basic training was brutal, but not in the way Sarah had expected. The physical challenges were difficult, but she pushed through them with determination that surprised her drill sergeants. The real challenge came from her fellow recruits, particularly the men who couldn't accept that a small woman could outshoot them on the firing range. During her first week of marksmanship training, Sarah quietly outperformed every other recruit in her unit. While the other soldiers struggled to hit targets at 300 yards, Sarah was consistently hitting bullseyes at 500 yards with iron sights. The instructors began to take notice, but some of her fellow recruits started making her life miserable. They would hide her equipment, pour sand in her gear, and make crude jokes about what they thought she was really doing in the army. Sarah never responded to their harassment. Instead, she would wake up earlier than everyone else, train harder than anyone expected, and continue to outperform them in every measurable way. One particular incident changed everything. During a live fire exercise, Sarah's unit was tasked with eliminating targets at various distances while under simulated combat stress. The other recruits were struggling with the pressure, missing targets and wasting ammunition. Sarah calmly took her position, controlled her breathing, and began systematically eliminating every target with single shots. The range instructor, a grizzled sergeant with 20 years of experience, watched through his binoculars as Sarah hit target after target with mechanical precision. When the exercise was over, he pulled Sarah aside and asked her a question that would change the direction of her entire military career. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" he asked. Sarah simply replied, "My grandfather taught me." The sergeant studied her for a long moment, then made a phone call that would eventually lead to Sarah being recommended for sniper school. But first, she had to finish basic training and prove that her shooting skills weren't just a lucky streak. Over the next several weeks, Sarah continued to excel in every aspect of her training. She was faster than most of the men in her unit during physical fitness tests, despite her smaller size. She scored higher on written exams about tactics and military history. And on the shooting range, she was in a class by herself. Word began to spread throughout the training base about the small woman who could outshoot anyone. Officers started showing up to watch her during range time, and rumors began circulating about her potentially being selected for special operations training. Sarah tried to ignore the attention and focus on her training. She knew that being noticed could be both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it might lead to opportunities to use her skills in ways that could save lives. On the other hand, it painted a target on her back among those who didn't believe women belonged in combat roles. The harassment from some of her fellow recruits intensified as word spread about her abilities. They couldn't accept that this quiet, unassuming woman was making them look bad day after day. Some of them began spreading rumors about her, suggesting that she was getting special treatment or that her scores were somehow fake. Sarah's response was to work even harder. She volunteered for every difficult assignment, took on leadership roles when given the opportunity, and continued to set the standard for excellence in every area of training. She also began helping other recruits who were struggling, particularly with marksmanship, which only made her more popular with the instructors and more resented by her detractors. As basic training neared its end, Sarah received news that would set her on a path few soldiers ever get the chance to walk. She had been selected for advanced infantry training, with the possibility of being recommended for sniper school if she continued to excel. The night before graduation, Sarah lay in her bunk thinking about how far she had come from that quiet girl reading books under the oak tree. She thought about her grandfather Frank, who had passed away just before she left for basic training. He never got to see her graduate, but she knew he would have been proud of what she had accomplished. Sarah also thought about the challenges that lay ahead. She knew that sniper school would be even more demanding than basic training, and that the skepticism about women in combat roles would only intensify. But she also knew that she had something special, a gift that could make a real difference in protecting her fellow soldiers. As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah made a promise to herself. She would prove that strength came in many forms, and that underestimating someone based on their appearance was a mistake that could have deadly consequences. She had no way of knowing that in just a few months she would have the chance to prove that promise in the most dramatic way possible. The next morning, Sarah graduated from basic training at the top of her class. As she stood at attention during the ceremony, she could see her parents in the crowd, their faces filled with pride and worry in equal measure. They still didn't fully understand her choice to become a soldier, but they could see the confidence and determination in their daughter's eyes. After the ceremony, Sarah's drill sergeant pulled her aside for a final conversation. He handed her a folder containing her next assignment and a recommendation letter for sniper school. "Chen," he said, "I've been training soldiers for 20 years and I've never seen natural ability like yours. But natural ability will only get you so far. The real test is what you do when everything goes wrong, when lives are on the line, and when everyone is counting on you to perform under pressure." Sarah looked him in the eye and replied, "I understand, Sergeant. I won't let you down." As Sarah packed her gear and prepared for the next phase of her training, she had no idea that those words would be tested in ways she couldn't imagine. In the months ahead, she would face challenges that would push her to her absolute limits and force her to prove that she truly belonged among the elite soldiers of the Delta Force. But first, she had to make it through sniper school, a training program so demanding that most candidates don't complete it successfully. Sarah was about to discover just how much she was willing to sacrifice to earn the right to call herself a Delta Force sniper. The United States Army Sniper School at Fort Benning, Georgia, was not a place for the weak or uncertain. As Sarah stepped off the bus on her first day, she could feel the weight of skeptical stares from her fellow candidates. Out of the 43 soldiers who had been selected for this elite training program, Sarah was the only woman. She had expected this, but it didn't make the reality any easier to handle. The other candidates were impressive specimens of military fitness. Most stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and arms that looked like they could bend steel. They had names like Tank, Bulldozer, and Hammer, nicknames that reflected both their physical presence and their reputations as formidable soldiers. Sarah, walking quietly among them, with her regulation gear bag slung over her shoulder, looked like a child who had wandered into the wrong place. The first instructor they met was Master Sergeant Rodriguez, a man whose reputation was legendary in special operations circles. He had served 3 tours in Iraq and 2 in Afghanistan, with confirmed kills that numbered in the dozens. His weathered face showed the strain of years spent in combat, and his eyes had the hard edge of someone who had seen too much death and destruction. Rodriguez looked over the group of candidates with the expression of a man examining cuts of meat at the butcher shop. When his gaze fell on Sarah, He stopped and studied her for several long seconds. The other candidates began to whisper among themselves, wondering if this small woman was some kind of mistake, or perhaps the victim of a paperwork error. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rodriguez began, his voice carrying the authority of decades of military experience. "Welcome to the most difficult training program in the United States military. Over the next 12 weeks, we are going to push you beyond every limit you thought you had. We are going to break you down completely and then build you back up into something harder, smarter, and more deadly than you ever imagined possible." He began walking down the line of candidates, stopping briefly in front of each one. When he reached Sarah, he paused again and looked down at her with an expression that was impossible to read. "Some of you are wondering what this soldier is doing here," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Some of you are thinking that maybe the army has made a mistake, that maybe someone like this doesn't belong in a program designed to create the deadliest marksman in the world." Sarah felt her face burn with embarrassment, but she kept her eyes forward and her expression neutral. She had learned during basic training that showing emotion in these situations only made things worse. "Let me make something very clear," Rodriguez continued, his voice growing harder. "I don't care what you look like, where you come from, or what's between your legs. The only thing that matters to me is whether you can put a bullet exactly where it needs to go when lives are on the line. If you can do that, you belong here. If you can't, you'll be gone before the week is over." The first week of sniper school was designed to weed out candidates who didn't have the mental toughness to handle the pressure of the program. The physical demands were intense, but they were nothing compared to the psychological stress that the instructors deliberately inflicted on the students. Sarah was subjected to constant scrutiny and criticism that seemed to go beyond what the other candidates experienced. Every movement she made was analyzed and found wanting. Every shot she took was examined for flaws that often didn't exist. The instructors seemed determined to find a reason to dismiss her from the program. But Sarah had learned something important during her childhood sessions with her grandfather Frank. Shooting wasn't just about physical skill, it was about mental discipline. Frank had taught her that the difference between a good shooter and a great one was the ability to remain calm under pressure, to control not just her breathing and heart rate, but also her emotions and thoughts. While the other candidates grew frustrated and angry with the constant harassment, Sarah remained calm and focused. When an instructor screamed at her for a shot that was only millimeters off center, she simply acknowledged the feedback and made the necessary adjustment for her next shot. When fellow candidates made cruel jokes about her presence in the program, she ignored them and concentrated on her training. The shooting portion of the program was where Sarah truly began to distinguish herself. The instructors had set up a series of increasingly difficult challenges, designed to test not just accuracy, but also the ability to perform under extreme stress. Candidates had to hit targets at distances that pushed the limits of their equipment and skills, often while being subjected to loud noises, time pressure, and deliberate distractions. Sarah approached each challenge with the same methodical precision she had learned in the Oregon woods. She would study the target, calculate the effects of wind and distance, adjust her scope accordingly, and then fire with the calm confidence of someone who knew exactly what the bullet would do. Her performance began to catch the attention of the other candidates and instructors for all the right reasons. While other students struggled to hit targets at 800 yards, Sarah was consistently placing shots within inches of the bullseye at over 1,000 yards. Her shooting scores were not just good, they were exceptional, even by the standards of an elite program designed to produce the best marksmen in the world. But sniper school was about much more than just shooting. Students had to master camouflage and concealment, learning how to become invisible in any environment. They studied ballistics, weather patterns, and the physics of long-range shooting. They learned about enemy tactics, communication protocols, and the complex ethical considerations of taking human life from a distance. Sarah excelled in every area of the curriculum. Her small size, which many had seen as a disadvantage, actually made her better at concealment than her larger classmates. She could hide in places where bigger soldiers simply wouldn't fit, and her natural patience allowed her to remain motionless for hours at a time. The academic portions of the program revealed another side of Sarah's abilities. She had always been a good student, but the intensity of sniper school brought out a level of focus and determination that surprised even her instructors. She memorized ballistics tables, studied weather patterns with the dedication of a meteorologist, and analyzed combat situations with the thoroughness of a chess master, planning 20 moves ahead. As the weeks passed, the attitude of the other candidates towards Sarah began to change. The initial skepticism and hostility were gradually replaced by grudging respect and eventually genuine admiration. It became clear to everyone that Sarah wasn't just keeping up with the program, she was setting the standard that everyone else was trying to reach. One incident in particular marked a turning point in how Sarah was perceived by her fellow candidates. During a field exercise designed to test camouflage and observation skills, students were given 6 hours to find and identify hidden instructors who were positioned throughout a large training area. Most candidates found 2 or 3 of the hidden instructors. Sarah found all 8, including 2 that the instructors hadn't expected anyone to spot. When the exercise was over, Master Sergeant Rodriguez gathered the candidates together for a debrief. He looked directly at Sarah as he spoke. "Today, one of you demonstrated skills that I have rarely seen in 20 years of training elite soldiers," he said. Not only did this candidate identify every target, but she also spotted 2 additional positions that we thought were undetectable. That level of observation and patience is exactly what separates good snipers from legendary ones. The respect that Sarah had earned through her performance began to translate into acceptance from her fellow candidates. They started including her in their informal study groups and asking for her help with shooting techniques. Sarah was generous with her knowledge, helping struggling candidates improve their skills and sharing techniques she had learned from her grandfather. But the most important test was still ahead. The final exercise of sniper school was a comprehensive field test that would determine which candidates would earn the right to call themselves Army snipers. Students would be evaluated on every aspect of their training in a realistic combat scenario that would push them to their absolute limits. The exercise took place over a grueling 72-hour period in a remote training area that simulated the harsh conditions of a combat zone. Candidates had to navigate difficult terrain, avoid detection by opposing forces, and complete a series of increasingly difficult shooting challenges while under extreme physical and mental stress. Sarah began the exercise knowing that everything she had worked for over the past 12 weeks would be decided by her performance during these 3 days. She also knew that as the only woman in the program, she would be held to a higher standard than her male counterparts. Any mistake or sign of weakness would be seen as proof that women didn't belong in elite combat roles. The first day of the exercise tested camouflage and movement skills. Candidates had to travel several miles through dense forest while avoiding detection by instructors who were actively hunting for them. Sarah used her small size to her advantage, moving through underbrush and terrain features that would have been impossible for larger soldiers to navigate. The second day focused on observation and intelligence gathering. Candidates had to identify and track enemy movements, while remaining completely hidden for extended periods. Sarah's patience and attention to detail served her well during this phase, as she was able to spot and catalogue enemy positions that other candidates missed entirely. But it was the final day of the exercise that would truly test whether Sarah had what it took to become an elite sniper. The shooting challenges were designed to simulate the most difficult conditions that snipers might face in combat. Candidates had to engage targets at extreme distances, in difficult weather conditions, and while under the pressure of time constraints and simulated enemy fire. Sarah approached each challenge with the calm focus that had become her trademark. She blocked out the sound of instructors yelling, the pressure of time limits, and the knowledge that her entire future as a soldier depended on her performance. Instead, she focused on the fundamentals that her grandfather had taught her years before. Breathe, aim, fire. When the exercise was over, Sarah felt a mixture of exhaustion and quiet confidence. She knew she had performed well, but she also knew that the instructors would take time to evaluate every aspect of each candidate's performance before making their final decisions. The graduation ceremony took place 2 days later. Of the 43 candidates who had started the program, only 21 had successfully completed all requirements and earned the right to wear the sniper badge. Sarah's name was called 5th on the list, and as she walked forward to receive her certification, she could see the pride and amazement in the faces of the instructors who had initially doubted her abilities. Master Sergeant Rodriguez pinned the sniper badge on Sarah's uniform and looked her in the eye as he spoke. "Chen, you have exceeded every expectation and proven that true warriors come in all shapes and sizes. You have earned not just this badge but the respect of everyone who has had the privilege of watching you train. I have no doubt that you will distinguish yourself in whatever assignment comes next." As Sarah stood at attention during the ceremony, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, from the quiet woods of Oregon to the elite ranks of Army snipers. She had proven that determination and skill were more important than physical size or gender expectations. But Sarah also knew that her real test was still ahead. Earning the sniper badge was just the beginning. Soon, she would be faced with opportunities to use her skills in real combat situations, where the targets wouldn't be paper, and the consequences of missing would be measured in human lives. What Sarah didn't know was that her exceptional performance at sniper school had caught the attention of recruiters for an even more elite unit. The Delta Force was looking for soldiers with unique skills and unshakable mental toughness. Sarah's combination of shooting ability, tactical intelligence, and proven ability to perform under pressure made her exactly the kind of candidate they were seeking. The invitation to try out for Delta Force selection would arrive just 3 weeks after her graduation from sniper school, setting in motion a series of events that would eventually lead to that fateful day in the mountains of Afghanistan, when Sarah would prove once and for all that those who underestimated her did so at their own peril. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered to Sarah's barracks by a stone-faced sergeant who offered no explanation and asked for no acknowledgement beyond Sarah's signature. The envelope was unmarked except for her name written in block letters, and the contents would change the trajectory of her military career forever. Inside was a single sheet of paper with instructions to report to a specific building at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, within 72 hours. No explanation was provided about the purpose of the summons, but Sarah recognized the implications immediately. Fort Bragg was home to the most elite special operations units in the United States military, including the legendary Delta Force. Sarah had heard whispered stories about Delta Force throughout her military training. They were the soldiers who operated in the deepest shadows, taking on missions that officially didn't exist and eliminating threats that posed the greatest danger to national security. They were selected from the very best soldiers in the Army, and the selection process itself was shrouded in such secrecy that most people weren't even sure exactly what it involved. The bus ride to Fort Bragg gave Sarah time to reflect on how far she had come in such a short period. Just months earlier, she had been the quiet girl from Oregon who spent her free time reading books and helping in her parents' hardware store. Now, she was a qualified Army sniper, heading to what might be a selection process for the most elite combat unit in the world. When Sarah arrived at the designated building, she found herself in the company of 36 other soldiers, all men, all with the hardened look of experienced combat veterans. Unlike her experience at sniper school, where her presence had generated surprise and skepticism, here the other candidates simply ignored her. These were professionals who had learned to focus on what mattered, and they understood that anyone who had been invited to this selection process had earned their place through demonstrated excellence. The first person to address the group was a colonel whose name tag read Davidson. He was a compact man with graying hair and the kind of quiet intensity that suggested he had seen and done things that most people couldn't imagine. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded soldiers in the most dangerous situations the military could offer. "Ladies and gentlemen," Colonel Davidson began, "you have been invited here because your military records indicate exceptional ability and potential. What happens over the next several weeks will determine whether that potential can be realized as a member of an organization that operates at the very highest levels of special operations." He paused and looked directly at each candidate before continuing. "I want to be absolutely clear about what you are volunteering for. The training you are about to undergo is designed to identify soldiers who can perform at peak effectiveness under conditions of extreme physical and psychological stress. The standards are non-negotiable, the requirements are absolute, and the failure rate is intentionally high." Sarah felt a familiar mixture of nervousness and excitement as Colonel Davidson outlined what lay ahead. The selection process would last 6 weeks and would test every aspect of their military skills and personal character. Physical fitness, tactical knowledge, psychological resilience, and leadership ability would all be evaluated through a series of increasingly difficult challenges. What made Delta Force selection different from other elite training programs was the emphasis on independent thinking and adaptability. While conventional military training focused on following orders and executing established procedures, Delta Force operators were expected to think creatively, make complex decisions under pressure, and adapt to rapidly changing situations with minimal guidance. The first phase of selection focused on physical conditioning and basic tactical skills. Candidates were subjected to grueling physical challenges that pushed their bodies to the absolute limit of endurance. Long-distance runs with heavy packs, obstacle courses designed to test strength and agility, and timed exercises that required both speed and precision became daily routine. Sarah's smaller size initially seemed like it would be a significant disadvantage in the physical challenges. Carrying the same weight as candidates who outweighed her by 50 pounds or more should have been impossible. But Sarah had learned something important during her years of training. Efficiency of movement was more important than raw strength, and mental toughness could overcome many physical limitations. While the larger candidates relied on brute force to power through the physical challenges, Sarah focused on technique and pacing. She studied each obstacle course until she could navigate it with minimal wasted motion. She calculated the most efficient pace for long-distance marches that would allow her to complete the course without exhausting herself. Most importantly, She refused to let physical discomfort affect her mental focus or determination. The instructors began to notice Sarah's approach to the challenges, and word spread about the small soldier who was not just keeping up with much larger candidates, but was often finishing ahead of them. Her technique became a subject of study for other candidates who were struggling with the physical demands of the program. But the physical challenges were just the beginning. The second phase of selection focused on tactical knowledge and decision-making skills. Candidates were presented with complex scenarios that had no clear solutions and were required to develop and execute plans under extreme time pressure. Sarah discovered that her analytical mind, which had served her well in academic settings, was perfectly suited to the kind of tactical problem-solving that Delta Force operations required. She could quickly assess a situation, identify the critical factors that would determine success or failure, and develop plans that maximized the chances of mission success while minimizing risk to personnel. One particular exercise highlighted Sarah's tactical abilities in a way that impressed even the most experienced instructors. Candidates were given a scenario involving a hostage rescue mission in an urban environment. They had limited intelligence, constrained resources, and a tight time window for execution. Most candidates developed straightforward assault plans that relied on overwhelming force and speed. Sarah took a different approach. She analyzed the scenario and identified several factors that the other candidates had overlooked. The building layout suggested multiple escape routes that the hostage takers could use if they detected an assault. The time of day and local population patterns created opportunities for confusion and misdirection that could be exploited. Most importantly, the psychological profile of the hostage takers suggested they would be more likely to negotiate if they believed they had a tactical advantage. Sarah's plan involved a coordinated deception that would make the hostage takers believe they were surrounded by a much larger force than actually existed, while simultaneously creating multiple opportunities for sniper teams to take clean shots if negotiations failed. The plan was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its potential effectiveness. When Sarah presented her plan to the instructors, the room fell silent as they absorbed the implications of what she had developed. Colonel Davidson asked several pointed questions about specific aspects of the plan, and Sarah answered each one with confidence and detailed justification for her decisions. After the exercise was complete, Colonel Davidson pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. "Chen, I've been running selection courses for Delta Force for 8 years, and I've never seen a candidate develop a plan of that sophistication during their first time through the program," he said. "Your ability to see beyond the obvious and develop creative solutions to complex problems is exactly what we look for in Delta Force operators." The third phase of selection tested psychological resilience and character under extreme stress. Candidates were subjected to interrogation exercises, sensory deprivation, and psychological pressure designed to break down their mental defenses and reveal their true character. The instructors wanted to know how each candidate would respond when everything went wrong and they were pushed beyond their breaking point. Sarah had always prided herself on her mental toughness, but the psychological challenges of Delta Force selection were unlike anything she had experienced before. She was subjected to hours of verbal abuse designed to undermine her confidence and self-worth. She was isolated in complete darkness for periods that seemed to last forever. She was deprived of sleep, food, and water until her body and mind were operating on the very edge of functionality. Through it all, Sarah drew on the inner strength that had sustained her through years of doubt and skepticism from others who couldn't see past her physical appearance. She had learned long ago that other people's opinions about her capabilities were irrelevant compared to her own knowledge of what she could accomplish. When the instructors tried to break her down by telling her she didn't belong in an elite unit, Sarah simply smiled and continued to perform at the highest level. The psychological evaluation also included extensive testing of judgment and decision-making under stress. Candidates were placed in scenarios where they had to make life-and-death decisions with incomplete information and severe time constraints. The instructors wanted to know whether each candidate could maintain their moral compass and tactical judgment even when exhausted, confused, and under extreme pressure. Sarah's performance during the psychological phase of selection was remarkable even by Delta Force standards. She demonstrated an ability to compartmentalize stress and maintain focus that impressed psychologists who had evaluated thousands of special operations candidates. Her decision-making remained crisp and well-reasoned, even under conditions that left other candidates confused and reactive. The final phase of selection involved a comprehensive field exercise that combined all the elements of the previous phases into a realistic simulation of a Delta Force mission. Candidates were divided into small teams and given complex objectives that required coordination, tactical expertise, and flawless execution under combat conditions. Sarah was assigned to a team of 4 experienced soldiers who had all served multiple combat tours. and were considered among the most capable candidates in the selection class. Initially, her teammates were uncertain about how to integrate her into their planning and execution, given her relative inexperience compared to their extensive combat backgrounds. But Sarah's performance during the field exercise quickly established her as an invaluable team member. Her ability to remain calm under pressure, combined with her exceptional marksmanship skills and tactical intelligence, made her the perfect anchor for complex operations that required precision and reliability. During one portion of the exercise, Sarah's team was tasked with eliminating a high-value target while minimizing civilian casualties and avoiding detection by a large enemy force. The mission required infiltrating a heavily defended compound, identifying and neutralizing the target, and extracting without raising an alarm. Sarah was assigned the role of Overwatch Sniper, responsible for providing security for the team and eliminating any threats that could compromise the mission. She positioned herself on a ridge nearly 900 yards from the target compound and began the patient work of observation and target identification that would determine the success or failure of the entire operation. For over 6 hours, Sarah remained motionless in her concealed position, watching the compound through her scope and cataloging the movements and patterns of the enemy forces. She identified guard rotations, communication protocols, and defensive positions with the thoroughness of a scientist conducting research. When the time came for her teammates to begin their infiltration, Sarah provided overwatch that was nothing short of perfect. She eliminated 2 sentries who posed a threat to the team's approach, guided them around patrol routes that would have compromised their position, and maintained constant communication that allowed them to complete their mission without detection. The exercise concluded with Sarah's team being the only one to successfully complete all objectives without casualties or compromise. The instructors were particularly impressed by Sarah's performance as Overwatch Sniper, noting that her ability to maintain focus and provide accurate intelligence for over 6 hours was exceptional, even by Delta Force standards. When the 6-week selection process was complete, only 11 of the original 37 candidates had successfully met all requirements and earned the right to join Delta Force. Sarah was not only among the successful candidates, she had finished at the top of the class in overall performance evaluation. Colonel Davidson personally delivered the news to Sarah during a private meeting in his office. "Chen, congratulations on successfully completing Delta Force selection," he said, shaking her hand with genuine warmth. "Your performance throughout the process has been exceptional, and I have no doubt that you will make significant contributions to our mission." He paused and looked at her seriously before continuing. "I want you to understand that what you have accomplished here goes beyond personal achievement. You have proven that excellence in special operations is not determined by physical size or gender, but by skill, intelligence, and character. Your example will open doors for others who might not have been given a chance otherwise." Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction and pride as she absorbed the reality of what she had achieved. From the quiet woods of Oregon to the most elite special operations unit in the world, she had proven that determination and skill could overcome any obstacle or prejudice. But Sarah also understood that earning a place in Delta Force was just the beginning of her real test. Soon she would be deployed on actual missions, where the stakes would be measured in human lives and the consequences of failure could be catastrophic. The training was over, but the real challenge was just beginning. Within weeks, Sarah would receive orders for her first deployment to Afghanistan, where she would have the opportunity to put her skills to the ultimate test in real combat operations. What she didn't know was that her deployment would lead to a moment that would define not just her career, but her entire understanding of what it meant to be a warrior in service to something greater than herself. The helicopter descended through the thin mountain air like a metal bird of prey, its rotors churning up clouds of dust that obscured the landing zone in a haze of brown earth and scattered stones. Sarah checked her equipment one final time as the aircraft settled onto the makeshift landing pad that had been carved into the mountainside by Army engineers just days before. This was her first deployment with Delta Force, and she was acutely aware that every member of her new unit would be watching to see how she performed under actual combat conditions. All the training and selection exercises in the world couldn't truly prepare someone for the reality of operating in a war zone where every decision could mean the difference between life and death. Sarah's team leader was Captain Marcus Johnson, a veteran of 7 combat deployments, who had earned his reputation through a combination of tactical brilliance and an unwavering commitment to bringing his soldiers home alive. Johnson was initially skeptical about having a newly minted Delta Force operator on his team, particularly one whose combat experience was limited to training exercises and simulations. But Colonel Davidson had personally recommended Sarah for Johnson's team, and Davidson's judgment was trusted throughout the special operations community. Johnson agreed to give Sarah a chance to prove herself, with the understanding that he wouldn't hesitate to replace her if she couldn't meet the demands of real-world operations. The rest of the team consisted of 4 experienced operators who had worked together for over 2 years. Sergeant First Class Tony Rodriguez was the team's communications specialist and medic, a soft-spoken man from Texas who could establish satellite communications in the middle of a sandstorm and treat combat wounds that would leave civilian doctors helpless. Staff Sergeant Mike Thompson handled explosives and breaching operations, with a reputation for being able to open any door or disable any device that stood in his team's way. The senior enlisted man was Master Sergeant David Kim, a weapons expert who could field strip and reassemble virtually any firearm ever manufactured, and who served as Johnson's right-hand man in planning and executing complex operations. Finally, there was Sergeant Jake Morrison, the youngest member of the team but already a veteran of multiple combat tours, who specialized in reconnaissance and surveillance operations. Sarah's role within the team was designated as Precision Marksman and Overwatch Specialist, responsibilities that played directly to her strengths as a trained sniper. But she also understood that in a small special operations team, every member had to be capable of performing multiple roles as situations demanded. The forward operating base where Sarah's team was stationed was a collection of temporary structures and defensive positions that had been established in a valley surrounded by towering mountains. The base served as a launching point for operations throughout the region, which had become a hotbed of insurgent activity and a critical battleground in the larger conflict. Sarah's first few weeks in country were spent on routine patrols and reconnaissance missions that allowed her to become familiar with the terrain, the enemy tactics, and the operating procedures of her new team. She quickly established herself as a reliable and competent operator who could be counted on to perform her duties without drama or complication. But Sarah was also aware that her teammates were still evaluating her performance and waiting to see how she would handle herself when things went wrong. In special operations, it was understood that everyone looked good during routine missions. The true measure of an operator's worth was how they performed when plans fell apart and lives hung in the balance. Sarah's first real test came during her 6th week in Afghanistan, when her team was tasked with conducting a reconnaissance mission in a remote valley where intelligence reports suggested a high-value target had established a temporary base of operations. The mission required a 2-day infiltration through difficult terrain, followed by extended surveillance to gather intelligence on enemy positions and activities. The team moved through the mountains under cover of darkness, using night vision equipment and careful route planning to avoid detection by enemy patrols. Sarah's role was to provide rear security during movement and to establish overwatch positions during rest periods, ensuring that the team couldn't be surprised by pursuing forces. As they made their way through the rocky terrain, Sarah demonstrated the movement skills and tactical awareness that had impressed her instructors during training. She moved quietly and efficiently, maintaining proper spacing and communication protocols while constantly scanning for threats that could compromise the mission. On the 2nd day of the mission, the team established a concealed observation post on a ridge overlooking the target valley. From their position nearly 1,200 yards from the suspected enemy compound, they began the painstaking work of cataloging enemy positions, identifying key personnel, and gathering the intelligence that would be used to plan future operations. Sarah was assigned to one of the observation shifts, using high-powered spotting scopes and camera equipment to document enemy activities. Her attention to detail and ability to remain motionless for extended periods made her ideally suited for this type of work, and she quickly identified several key details that had been missed by previous observers. During her 12-hour shift, Sarah documented the arrival of a convoy that appeared to include high-ranking enemy commanders based on the security protocols and deference shown by the other fighters in the compound. She also identified several hidden defensive positions that could pose a threat to any future assault on the facility. But the most significant discovery came when Sarah noticed a pattern in the movement of guards around the compound that suggested the presence of prisoners being held in one of the buildings. The implications of this discovery were enormous, as it meant that any future operation would need to account for the safety of potential hostages. Captain Johnson reviewed Sarah's observations and intelligence reports with growing amazement. Her level of detail and tactical analysis was exceptional, and her identification of the potential hostage situation had critical implications for how any future mission would be planned and executed. "Outstanding work, Chen," Johnson told her after reviewing her reports. "This is exactly the kind of intelligence we need to conduct effective operations. Your observations have given us a complete picture of what we're dealing with down there." The mission concluded successfully when the team extracted without detection after gathering 3 days' worth of intelligence on enemy activities. Sarah's performance had been flawless, and she had proven that she could operate effectively under the challenging conditions of real-world combat operations. But the true test of Sarah's abilities was still ahead. 2 weeks after the reconnaissance mission, intelligence reports indicated that the compound they had observed was being used to plan a major attack on coalition forces. The decision was made to conduct a direct action mission to eliminate the threat and rescue any hostages that might be present. Sarah's team was selected to spearhead the operation, with additional support from a larger force that would provide security and extraction capabilities. The mission would be the most complex and dangerous operation that Sarah had participated in, and its success would depend on the precise execution of a plan that left no room for error.
The mission briefing took place in a secure facility where detailed maps and aerial photographs covered every available surface.
Intelligence analysts provided updates on enemy strength, defensive positions, and the layout of the target compound. Medical personnel briefed the team on trauma treatment procedures that might be needed if casualties were sustained during the operation. Captain Johnson outlined the mission plan with the methodical precision of a chess master explaining a complex strategy. The assault would begin with Sarah establishing an overwatch position that would allow her to provide sniper support for the assault team while maintaining observation of potential escape routes. "Chen, your position will be critical to mission success," Johnson explained, pointing to a ridge that overlooked the target compound from the north. "You'll need to eliminate any sentries that pose a threat to our approach, provide overwatch during the assault, and be prepared to engage any enemy forces that attempt to escape or bring in reinforcements." Sarah studied the terrain features and calculated the distances involved in her assignment. The overwatch position was nearly 900 yards from the main compound, with additional targets potentially extending out to over 1,000 yards. The shots would be challenging under ideal conditions, and the mission would be conducted in the pre-dawn darkness that would make target identification even more difficult. "Understood, sir," Sarah replied. "I'll need to infiltrate to the position at least 2 hours before the assault begins, to ensure proper positioning and target identification." The team spent the next day rehearsing the mission on a mock-up compound that had been constructed to match the layout of the target facility. Every aspect of the operation was practiced repeatedly until each team member could execute their role with muscle memory precision. Sarah practiced the approach to her overwatch position until she could navigate the route in complete darkness without hesitation. She calculated range cards for every possible target location and memorized the ballistics data that would be critical for making accurate shots under combat conditions. As the sun set on the day before the mission, Sarah felt a mixture of nervousness and anticipation that reminded her of the moments before important competitions during her youth. But this was no competition, and the consequences of missing would be measured in the lives of her teammates rather than points on a scorecard. The helicopter insertion went smoothly, with the team landing several miles from the target compound under cover of darkness. Sarah separated from the main assault force and began her approach to the overwatch position, moving carefully through terrain that she had memorized from aerial photographs and reconnaissance reports. The climb to the ridge was more difficult than anticipated, with loose rock and steep gradients that threatened to send her tumbling back down the mountainside with every step. But Sarah pressed forward with the determination that had carried her through every challenge in her military career, knowing that her teammates were counting on her to be in position when the operation began. As Sarah reached her designated overwatch position, she could see the target compound spread out below her in the valley. Lights from the buildings created pools of illumination in the darkness, and she could make out the movement of guards patrolling the perimeter. Through her night vision scope, the scene looked like a deadly game board where one wrong move could result in catastrophic consequences. Sarah established her firing position with the careful precision of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. She checked her rifle's zero, calculated the ballistics for the range and environmental conditions, and began the methodical process of identifying and cataloguing every potential target within the compound. As she settled into her position and prepared for what lay ahead, Sarah had no way of knowing that the next 12 minutes would test every skill she had learned and every ounce of courage she possessed. The mission was about to become far more complicated than anyone had anticipated, and Sarah would soon find herself in a situation where 8 lives hung in the balance of her ability to deliver precision fire under the most challenging conditions imaginable. The radio crackled softly in her ear as Captain Johnson's voice confirmed that the assault team was in position and ready to begin the operation. Sarah took a deep breath, settled her cheek against the stock of her rifle, and prepared to prove once and for all that those who had underestimated her capabilities had made a fatal mistake. The radio transmission that changed everything came at exactly 0347 hours, delivered in the calm, professional tone that special operations soldiers use when reporting catastrophic news. "Overwatch, this is Hammer 6. We have a problem. Intelligence was wrong about enemy strength. We're looking at approximately 40 hostiles instead of the reported 15. Assault team is compromised and taking heavy fire. We need immediate sniper support on multiple targets. Sarah felt her pulse quicken, but her voice remained steady as she responded. Hammer 6, this is Overwatch. I have eyes on compound, identifying targets now. Through her night vision scope, Sarah could see muzzle flashes erupting from positions throughout the compound, as enemy fighters engaged her teammates who had been attempting to approach the main building. What was supposed to be a quick in-and-out operation had turned into a prolonged firefight against overwhelming odds. Captain Johnson's voice crackled through her earpiece again, and this time she could hear the strain of combat in his tone. Overwatch, we have civilians in Building 2 who appear to be hostages. Enemy is using them as human shields. We need precision fire to eliminate threats without endangering the hostages. Sarah studied the scene below through her scope, analyzing the tactical situation with the same methodical approach she had learned during her grandfather's hunting lessons years before. The compound was now a maze of muzzle flashes, moving shadows, and innocent people caught in the crossfire. Every shot she fired would need to be perfect. Hammer 6. Overwatch has identified 8 priority targets, beginning engagement now. Target 1 appeared in her crosshairs at 0348 hours. An enemy fighter was positioned behind sandbags on the roof of the main building, firing an automatic weapon down at her pinned teammates. The range was 847 yards, with a slight crosswind from the east that would push the bullet approximately 3 inches to the left. Sarah made the necessary adjustments to her scope, controlled her breathing, and squeezed the trigger with the gentle pressure her grandfather had taught her was like picking a ripe apple from a tree. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and through her scope she watched the enemy fighter drop instantly.
Target down.
Moving to target 2. The second target was more challenging. A sniper had positioned himself in a window of Building 3, approximately 920 yards from Sarah's position. He was partially concealed behind the window frame, presenting only a small portion of his head and shoulder as a target. Worse, he was actively engaging Sarah's teammates, and had already wounded one of the assault team members. Sarah calculated the ballistics for the increased range and adjusted for the fact that the target was partially protected by the building's structure. She would need to thread the bullet through a gap in the window frame that was less than 12 inches wide. At nearly 1,000 yards, the margin for error was essentially 0. She steadied her breathing, found her natural respiratory pause, and fired. The bullet traveled for what seemed like an eternity before finding its mark. The enemy sniper disappeared from the window, his weapon clattering to the ground outside the building. Second target down, continuing engagement. By 0349 hours, Sarah had eliminated 4 enemy fighters and was already acquiring her 5th target when the situation became even more desperate. Captain Johnson's voice came through her earpiece with news that made her blood run cold. Overwatch, we have enemy reinforcements approaching from the east. Estimate 2 vehicles with approximately 8 additional hostiles. They'll be in position to cut off our extraction route in less than 3 minutes. Sarah swiveled her rifle toward the approaching vehicles, which were still over 1,100 yards away and moving rapidly across the rocky terrain. Hitting a moving target at that distance would require calculations that pushed the limits of what was possible with her equipment and ammunition. The lead vehicle was a technical truck with a machine gun mounted in the back. If it reached the compound, the additional firepower would overwhelm her teammates and turn an already desperate situation into a massacre. Sarah had one chance to stop the vehicle before it could deploy its crew and equipment. She led the target, accounting for the vehicle's speed and direction, and aimed for the driver's position through the windshield. At 1,127 yards, with the target moving at approximately 35 miles per hour, the shot required calculations that she performed instinctively based on years of practice and training. The bullet struck the windshield, and the vehicle immediately swerved off course, rolling twice before coming to rest against a large boulder. The second vehicle stopped to provide assistance, buying precious time for Sarah's teammates to complete their mission. Reinforcement vehicle neutralized, continuing Overwatch. At 0350 hours, Sarah's teammates successfully breached the building containing the hostages and began the extraction process. But 3 enemy fighters had positioned themselves to ambush the extraction route, hiding behind cover that would allow them to devastate the assault team as they attempted to withdraw with the rescued civilians. Sarah identified all 3 positions simultaneously and realized that she would need to eliminate them in rapid succession before any of them could alert the others or return fire. The 3 targets were at different ranges and elevations, requiring her to make significant adjustments to her scope between shots while maintaining the speed necessary to prevent the enemy fighters from responding. She engaged the furthest target first, a fighter positioned 963 yards away behind a stone wall. The bullet found its mark just as the fighter was bringing his weapon to bear on Sarah's teammates. Without pausing to confirm the kill, Sarah adjusted her scope for the second target at 734 yards and fired again. The second target dropped immediately. The third target had heard the gunshots and was scanning the surrounding terrain, trying to locate the sniper, who was systematically eliminating his comrades. Sarah had perhaps 5 seconds before he would identify her position and begin returning fire, potentially compromising her ability to provide continued support for the extraction. She acquired the target at 891 yards and fired without hesitation. The enemy fighter was in the process of raising his rifle when the bullet struck, ending his threat permanently. Extraction route is clear. All targets neutralized. By 0351 hours, Sarah had eliminated 7 enemy fighters and disabled the reinforcement vehicle. But the most challenging shot was still ahead. Through her scope, she could see an 8th target that posed the greatest threat to mission success. An enemy commander had positioned himself near the hostages, using them as human shields while directing the defense of the compound. The target was only partially visible, presenting a shot that required Sarah to thread her bullet through a gap between 2 hostages who were being held directly in front of the enemy fighter. The range was 823 yards, and the shot would need to be precise to within inches to avoid hitting innocent civilians. Sarah studied the target through her scope, waiting for an opportunity that might give her a clear shot without endangering the hostages. For nearly 30 seconds, she watched and waited, her finger resting lightly on the trigger as she calculated angles and distances with the precision of an engineer designing a bridge. The opportunity came when the enemy commander shifted position slightly to get a better view of the approaching assault team. For less than 2 seconds, a small portion of his head was visible between the hostages, presenting a target area roughly the size of a playing card at over 800 yards distance. Sarah didn't hesitate. She had trained her entire life for shots exactly like this one, where precision and confidence were the only things standing between success and catastrophe. She controlled her breathing, settled her crosshairs on the tiny target area, and squeezed the trigger with the absolute certainty that the bullet would go exactly where she intended. The enemy commander dropped instantly, and the hostages scattered to safety as Sarah's teammates moved in to complete the extraction. The compound fell silent except for the sound of helicopter rotors approaching from the extraction point. All targets neutralized. Compound is secure. Extraction team is clear to proceed. By 0359 hours, exactly 12 minutes after the first shot, Sarah had eliminated 8 enemy fighters with 8 shots, cleared the extraction route, disabled enemy reinforcements, and enabled the successful rescue of 6 civilians who had been held hostage for over 3 weeks. As Sarah prepared to withdraw from her overwatch position, Captain Johnson's voice came through her earpiece with a tone of amazement that she had never heard from him before. "Overwatch, this is Hammer 6. I've been doing this for 15 years, and what I just witnessed was the finest display of precision marksmanship I have ever seen. You didn't just save this mission, you saved every life on this operation." The extraction went smoothly, with Sarah's team and the rescued hostages reaching the landing zone without further enemy contact. As the helicopters lifted off and carried them away from the compound, Sarah felt a profound sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with personal achievement and everything to do with knowing that her skills had made a difference when it mattered most. During the debrief following the mission, Colonel Davidson reviewed the after-action reports and video footage from the operation with a kind of careful attention that indicated he understood the historical significance of what had occurred. "Chen, what you accomplished during those 12 minutes will be studied and discussed in special operations circles for years to come," he told Sarah during a private meeting. 8 targets eliminated with 8 shots, at ranges extending beyond 1,100 yards, under combat conditions that would challenge the most experienced snipers in the world. This is the kind of performance that defines legendary operators. Sarah listened to the praise with the same quiet confidence that had carried her through every challenge in her military career. She appreciated the recognition, but she was more interested in the practical implications of what had happened during the mission. "Sir, I was just doing my job. My teammates needed precision fire support, and I provided it." "That's what we train for." Colonel Davidson smiled at Sarah's response, recognizing the professional attitude that separated true warriors from those who are motivated primarily by personal glory. "That attitude is exactly why you belong in Delta Force, Chen. But I want you to understand that what you accomplished goes beyond just doing your job. You proved definitively that excellence in special operations has nothing to do with physical size or gender and everything to do with skill, dedication, and performance under pressure." Word of Sarah's performance during the hostage rescue mission spread throughout the special operations community with the speed that only truly remarkable achievements can generate. Senior officers who had previously been skeptical about women in combat roles found themselves forced to reconsider their positions when confronted with the undeniable evidence of what Sarah had accomplished. The mission also had immediate practical consequences for Sarah's career and the broader military. She was promoted ahead of schedule and became one of the most sought-after snipers in Delta Force for high-priority operations that required absolute precision under challenging conditions. More importantly, Sarah's success opened doors for other women who aspired to serve in special operations roles. The barriers that had seemed insurmountable just months before began to crumble as military leaders recognized that they had been overlooking a significant pool of potential talent based on outdated assumptions about gender and capability. Sarah continued to serve with distinction for several more years, participating in dozens of successful operations and mentoring younger operators who looked up to her as an example of what was possible through dedication and skill. Her reputation grew with each mission, and she became known throughout the special operations community as one of the most reliable and effective snipers of her generation. But Sarah never forgot the lesson that she had learned during those 12 minutes in the mountains of Afghanistan. True strength wasn't measured by physical size or gender. It was measured by the ability to perform when lives were on the line and failure was not an option. Years later, when Sarah retired from military service and began working as an instructor at the Army's premier sniper school, she would tell her students about that morning in Afghanistan when she proved that those who underestimate others based on appearance do so at their own peril. The most dangerous person you will ever face, she would tell them, is the one you don't take seriously until it's too late. Never assume you know someone's capabilities based on what you can see. Judge them by what they can do when everything is on the line. Sarah Chen had proven that morning that she was exactly that kind of person. In 12 minutes that seemed to last forever, she had taken 8 shots that changed not just the outcome of a single mission, but the entire understanding of what was possible for women in the military's most elite units. The girl who had once read books under an oak tree in Oregon had become one of the most lethal and respected operators in the most elite special operations unit in the world, and she had done it by proving, one perfect shot at a time, that those who underestimated her were making a fatal mistake.